Welcome, Dan. Welcome, Natalie, Arshvir, Deepshika. And I do apologize if I mispronounce anyone's names. Let's see, we've got a question. Oh, someone raised their hand. Maybe that was an accident. Shalana, welcome. Andrew, welcome. Alrighty, I think we can go ahead and get started and we'll catch some more folks as they join. But welcome to the Pivot into Consulting event that I'm hosting. Before we get started, just wanted to flag to our new joiners that we are giving away a seat to our Management Consulting Bootcamp that starts in February. You can enter using the QR code or the bit.ly link here. Feel free to take a screenshot of this slide, and I am going to advance and we're going to dive in. Alrighty. Before we get started, wanted to give a quick introduction. Hi, my name's Ellie. I went from a master's in biology to management consulting, which is generally when people think about consulting, a atypical background for this sort of thing. I currently live in Houston, Texas, though I am about to start a move to Utah. As soon as this event ends, I will be hopping in a moving truck. So that's exciting. I have 2 cats. I love reading. I love baking, all things outdoors. And if you use this QR code here, you can access my coaching profile on Leland if you'd like to schedule an intro call. If you're interested in getting some one-on-one coaching for management consulting, you can also use my discount code here, LE-J-20, to get 20% off your first session with me. And a little bit of background on me. Like I mentioned, I was a master's in biology and went from that into a business analyst role at McKinsey & Company. I was there for about 2 years and left as a senior business analyst. And one thing I want to just highlight here is that my background, like I did not go to an Ivy League school. I came from an atypical background. I did an internship before I graduated at a small startup. So you're not going to see like any huge big brand names in my work experience aside from McKinsey's. And I just want to point that out as I think making a switch into consulting can feel really daunting when folks have a really impressive or Ivy League background, but you don't need that. So I just hope that's encouraging if you're thinking about the switch and maybe feeling a bit daunted by the task. I think you can prove yourself to be capable and make it work. And that's kind of my whole approach with coaching. I'm really passionate about helping folks who have a non-traditional background who are interested in consulting be able to make that transition successfully and smoothly and then thrive once they're there. So my goal is to help you go from whatever background you are here. This was me back in my fish biologist days in my fish lab. Help you go from that into consulting. And this is a ChatGPT generated image. I asked it to generate a photo of me as a consultant, and this is what it came up with. Not terribly far off, I guess, but this could be you. So here's what we'll cover today. I'll go for a brief intro to consulting and give you kind of a lay of the land there. We'll talk about building a network. Then we'll talk about the actual application process, the interview basics, and then we'll close with a bit of Q&A. And also just for folks who have joined, I have a hard time seeing messages in chat. So if you do have questions, feel free to just come off mute and ask them live. Otherwise, you can save your question until the Q&A at the end, and we'll try to address them then. Alrighty, intro to consulting. The main takeaway is this. There are many different types of consulting and many great firms where you can be a consultant. So this is just a subset of many, many different firms. The 3 companies at the top in green, McKinsey & Company, Bain & Company, and BCG, are we call them MBB in the consulting world. They are just the top 3 consulting firms globally. So these are very big firms. They have a global presence, very well known, lots of brand recognition, and these are kind of general management consulting firms. So they do it all, any industry, any type of consulting. These folks have like a big presence in all industries. That said, there are lots of other types of firms that are also great. A lot of these names you'll probably also recognize: Deloitte, EY, LEK, Oliver Wyman, PwC. But what I want to point out here is that some of these firms are also generalists. but some of them have a pretty strong focus on a given industry or a type of client. Or a type of consulting. PwC, for example, they do generalist consulting, but they also have a strong focus in accounting. If you're interested in tech, Accenture is known for their tech branch. Booz Allen Hamilton, they do a lot of general consulting, but they do a lot of contracting work with the US government as well. Clearview Healthcare Partners, they do a lot of healthcare consulting and so forth. So as you're thinking about where you want to apply, of course, apply to MBB firms, like shoot your shot. Just keep in mind that statistically, it's unlikely that you will land an offer there. So I'd encourage you to cast a really wide net and be open-minded about potentially some boutique firms where you could have a great career and have a great experience. And just know that there are lots of ways to be a consultant and lots of places to have a great career there. So let's pivot into the recruiting process. Here's a little overview of what this typically looks like. The way it's laid out makes it seem very linear. I will say that a lot of these steps do kind of bleed into each other. At first, you're going to want to spend a lot of your time learning and networking. So you're going to want to build your network by reaching out to folks on LinkedIn. If you have some sort of networking club or something like that at your university, feel free to work through them, try to get recommendations from folks who may be connected to the spaces you're interested in. And specifically for folks in school, I'd encourage you to attend recruiting events and information sessions. Many big firms will host those on college campuses, and they're generally open to all students at the university. That's a great way to meet actual consultants, learn more about the firm, and that can kind of guide your strategy when you're thinking about applying. Steps 2 and 3 happen in tandem. So you're going to be assembling your application. You really want to make sure you know deadlines there. If you don't know the deadlines, you've missed it. So make sure you know your deadlines, and then make sure that you've updated your resume and write cover letters. And then while you're doing this, you'll probably be doing your interview prep as well. And this is where most folks spend their time. There are 3 main flavors of interviews for consulting. You have case interviews, behavioral interviews, and then these screener interviews for games, case robots, Pymetrics. And I'll go over all of this in some subsequent slides. And then after you've done all of that, you get to complete your interview. You'll go through all of those interviews that I outlined, and then hopefully you've landed the offer with all of your immense skill. So let's talk about building a network. As someone who was coming from an academic background into consulting, network felt very awkward for me at first. I felt like I was bugging people. And one thing I just want to call out right now is that networking is very, very common in business, specifically in consulting. It's very normal. It's a part of the day-to-day. So you are not doing something weird, and you're not bothering consultants if you are reaching out to network with them. They are used to this. They are expecting this. So do it. And this is a skill worth getting great at. The reason you want to network is increases your chances of being able to obtain a referral from someone who is working at the firm that you are interested in. And referrals can be a really helpful piece in getting an invitation to interview. Basically signals to the firm that, hey, this person has been pre-vetted. This could be a good lead for someone to interview. Networking also helps you learn more about firms. It can kind of guide, okay, is this an industry that I'm interested in? Is the culture here something I'm interested in? Are they doing work that I'd like? Would I work with people that I like? You can also use networking to get guidance and feedback for your interviews. And like I mentioned, networking is a big part of the actual job. When you are a consultant, you are networking within your firms constantly. You are networking with your clients constantly. And it is worth putting in the effort to feel really comfortable with networking earlier on, and this will transfer and be a super helpful skill later on once you are in the job. And there are different types of networking calls. I'd say there's 2 different types. You have your basic get to know yous. This is your initial outreach. This is when you're trying to build relationships and build knowledge. And this is also when you become what I think you would be like a LinkedIn super user. You will be DMing everybody under the sun. You'll be trying to connect with people. You will get ignored. And it's not because they don't like you or because you did something wrong. It probably means they just don't have time to chat with you. So don't be discouraged. Send the DMs, connect with everybody you can in a thoughtful way, of course. And then your second type of networking call is really focused on your application and interview prep. So this is where you have established relationships, you are getting targeted input and support on your application. Sometimes you can do mock interviews with consultants who you have rapport with. And if you haven't secured a referral yet, this is the stage where you want to try to do that. When it comes to referrals, this is not something you want to ask for outright. This is something you kind of hint at, like, hey, I'm very interested in this firm. I would love to learn more about it. Or if you have any advice as I'm trying to get an interview, would certainly welcome any input or support that you could offer. And that kind of cues them up to say, like, okay, this person's interested. If I want to give them a referral, I could. And lastly, just some general tips for success. Start early. Keep a networking tracker. This can be just a Google Sheet. Face the cold outreach, but try for warm where you can. And I also recommend having a personal elevator pitch. This is just like a little 30-second headline on you. So when I was networking, mine was very focused on like, I am a fish biologist and I did all this research in evolution and ecology, and I'm interested in learning how I can apply that skill set to different types of problems in the business world and make that pivot and have a different type of impact outside of what I've done in academic research. That was my 30 seconds. It gave people something to remember me by. Often the fact that I was a fish biologist piqued people's interest. They remembered that when I hopped on other calls, and helped them have something to remember me by, and give a little bit about my why and why I was interested in consulting. So I'd recommend taking some time to figure out what you would be in a nutshell if you were trying to set up a headline for yourself. I'll pause here. Were there any questions about networking that I could address quickly before we move on? And feel free to just come off mute if you do have any. Alrighty. All right, we've had a few more people join since the beginning. So just wanted to quickly flag that at the end of this session, we will be giving away a seat to our upcoming management consulting bootcamp. It starts in February and runs through mid-March. You can use this link here to enter that giveaway. And to give you a sense for what this bootcamp covers, it covers like it's like a masterclass on interviewing. We have some of our top consulting coaches off of our platform at Leland who will be leading these sessions. These are folks who have interviewed at firms, they have landed offers there, and then also have been interviewers in some cases at these firms. So definitely worth looking at if you are interested in, and would recommend you giving that a look. And then some other stats on what this course includes. You'll get 12 hours of live instruction, multiple case interview preps, you'll get access to drills and access to our content library on Leland Plus. This comes out to a value of over $2,500, but for tonight, you will get a exclusive price. You can apply to enroll for this bootcamp for $7.99. Or if you win the seat, you can get it for free. So one last plug to enter to win here. You can go ahead and take a screenshot of this page if you'd like to use this link. Excellent. So now we'll pivot into the actual application. So let's talk about your resume. What are the keys to having a standout consulting resume? Couple things here. Structure and format of your resume for consulting matters quite a bit. So when I was making my resume, I was struck by how little from my CV was immediately transferable into my resume. They focus on different things. CVs can be quite long and detailed. And so I ended up having to trim back my CV and emphasize different parts. So this here on the right-hand side of this page is an example of like high level what that structure looks like. So you typically start with a summary of your education. So where you went to school, what degree you were pursuing, your GPA, any academic highlights, like if you were on a scholarship or you received any awards, or if you were in a top percentage of your class. And then typically you also provide a standardized test score, which can be funny to some people. Some people include their ACT score, which is funny. I thought that was weird, but that's okay, I guess. It was an easier standardized test compared to others. So feel free to throw that on there. You'll also give some highlights from your employment history. And you do want to be a little judicious about what jobs you are including here. So I worked at a bakery in high school. Don't include that in your employment history here. Not that being a baker in high school isn't valuable. It's just not super relevant for the type of job that you're applying to here. So you want to be able to emphasize jobs where you were able to make an impact. that tie a little bit more cleanly to consulting. That said, like most of my employment history was related to biology because that is what I had been pursuing. But you have to frame them in ways of like, I contributed in this way and it helped me achieve this and it made this kind of impact. Those are the kinds of stories that you're trying to communicate. Next, you'll want to highlight some service or leadership history if you have any. And then at the bottom, I think it's great to include some personal details. This can be any number of things, but I think this gives kind of a more warm, personal touch to your resume. For example, on mine, I talked about how I loved baking bread. That was one of my little bullet points there. And I think that's great. Give something to remember you by. So just returning to the keys on the left-hand side, some other things to think about when you're putting together a consulting resume. You want to focus on having really active, punchy language. This needs to be very impact focused. It needs to be very, I did this and it achieved this and that was great because of this. Which takes me to the third bullet point here on implementing STAR in each bullet. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. And if you've included commentary or some notes on all four of those items, you will have kind of told a mini and complete story and thought in each bullet. So each bullet should describe each of those things. And related to that, when you're talking about the action or the result of your bullet, you want to try to quantify that as much as possible. So I did X amount of things to achieve Y amount of result. And don't worry if this isn't necessarily tied to dollars. I think some people are like, how do I turn my experience as a history major into something quantified? There are creative ways to think about this. An example from my resume when I applied is I had worked in a museum cataloging preserved specimens, and I had figured out a better way to improve the cataloging process so it went faster. And so what I did is I compared the amount of time it took me to catalog a specimen before I updated it against the time that it took me to catalog once I had improved the system. And I said, okay, I improved the system by X amount, so I increased my efficiency by X amount, and that is what I reported in my bullet point. So there's ways to think creatively about quantifying impact that may not necessarily come down to a dollar, but being able to quantify impact is important. It's a big part of the job once you are a consultant. And my last point, don't shy away from sharing your non-business experience. Like I mentioned, most of my employment history was biology focused because that's what I was doing. And it worked out. And if that's the experience you have, lean into it. Think about how you can communicate that in a compelling way that highlights, I'm a competent person, I do great work, and here are the great things that I've done. Let's switch over to cover letters. Cover letters are interesting because they are sometimes optional. Not every firm wants them. For example, Bain really cares about cover letters, but McKinsey does not require one. And I generally say if a firm does not require a cover letter, save your time and don't write one for that firm. That was my approach and it worked out well. But cover letters can be tricky because often folks approach them as a summary of their resume, and that is not what a cover letter is. I would think of a cover letter as a firm's first look at your written communication skills, which is, again, a big part of the actual job. Are you able to communicate thoughts succinctly and clearly in written form? Again, do not rehash your resume here. They already have that. Your cover letter should complement your resume and provide additional information. So a lot of your cover letter will be focused around kind of your why. Why are you interested in consulting? Why are you interested in this specific firm? Why would you be a great hire? And that's what your kind of 3, maybe 4 paragraphs in your cover letter will be focused on. You want to be able to sell the skills and perspectives that you would uniquely bring to the firm in whatever consulting role that you're looking at. So again, have kind of a high level summary of what the format of a cover letter typically looks like. Your first paragraph will provide a brief introduction. I'd kind of harken back to what your elevator pitch would be and kind of expand that out a little bit more, maybe make it a little bit more formal and appropriate for this kind of letter. And then articulate why you're interested in this role. Paragraph 2, you'll start to dive into your skills, maybe highlight some stories or specific examples of how you've applied them. And transitioning from 2 to 3, you're going to focus a little bit more about like why you're excited about the firm, why you're excited to bring your expertise, your skills, your knowledge to this sort of environment, this sort of role. And then you can close again by emphasizing why you're excited about the firm. Cover letters, I think, are formulaic, which is helpful, but you do want to personalize them depending on the firms that you're applying to. So if I were submitting a cover letter to BCG, it would look different from the cover letter that I've submitted to Bain, in the sense that there are different things about those firms that I would want to highlight in their respective cover letters. I would not want them to be the same. So unlike a resume, you can submit the same resume to pretty much any consulting firm and it'll work great. Cover letters do require a little bit more customization. Any questions about resume or cover letters? Again, please come off mute if you do. I have a hard time seeing the chat when I am sharing my screen.
Hi, Ellie. I have one question.
Yeah.
Hi, Arshveer here. My background is in biochemistry and
Sure.
data science and AI engineering now. And I've worked at a startup for a while I was actually in school. So actually haven't been able to fully translate that experience while, I guess, applying to consulting roles. It's
Mhm.
just, I don't know, I keep thinking that kind of it might feel fake to them that, oh, you progressed from an intern to leading the department at the startup for machine learning.
Mm.
And this was about a 2-year span.
Yeah. I mean, if that's what happened, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Like, have that be in your resume. If that's a story that you want to discuss in your cover letter, I think that's appropriate there. I actually have a very good friend. She did a PhD in biochemistry and went to McKinsey. She was in a more specialized role, so she did work in their chemical solutions branch. So I wouldn't shy away from that. I think if you're looking at a generalist firm, they won't be thrown off by that. I think they'll probably be like, that's great. He did cool stuff. So as long as that's legit, you have stories to back it up. I would lean into that for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alrighty. Now on to interviewing, and this kind of will wrap up the more structured content of this event and this presentation. There are 3 different types of interviews, which I briefly outlined earlier on. You have the case interview, the behavioral interview, and your games, Pymetrics, and case robots. So the case interview, this is the type of interview that most folks are focused on when they are preparing. Case interviews are designed to assess your ability to problem solve, to use analytics to drive to solutions, and being able to structure your thoughts in a clear and concise way. So case interviews are typically presented as a simulated business problem, and your task is to be able to take a pretty high level problem, break it down into potential factors that would be causing that problem, and then from there, try to work toward a solution. The structure of a case interview can vary a little bit by firm, in the sense that some firms like you to drive the interview as the person being interviewed, and other folks are a little bit more interviewer led. So they will guide you through what they want you to do. And then some firms are kind of a little bit in between. You'll do a little bit of leading, a little bit of following. McKinsey, for example, in my experience, tended to be a little bit more interviewee led. Bain tends to be a little bit more interviewer led. And BCG, from what I understand, is a little bit in between the two of those. I'd say a big skill for case interviewing in general is being prepared to lead the interview and kind of guide your way through it and drive it, even if you're not asked to. I think that shows I have a plan for how to address this problem, and I have a hypothesis for what the solution might be, and I'm prepared to drive you to it in a really structured way. So that's case interviewing in a nutshell. Talking about behavioral interviews are more focused on soft skills and a gauge for cultural fit. So behavioral interviews typically are centered around a firm's specific values or mission, and they're focused really squarely on your personal experiences. They go in depth on how you make decisions, why you made a certain decision, what your rationale for it was. Um, and you need to be prepared with stories, but they can't be canned. So you need to know a story very deeply and know the minutia of it in order to be able to tell it and give satisfying answers to the interviewer here. I think behavioral interviews are super fun. I just thought of cool things that I did or things that I thought were interesting. And often if they are your own personal experience and they really were interesting to you, you will not struggle to come up with your whys and your reasonings for why you made a specific decision, how it translated somewhere else. I think the key thing is being able to take the things that were interesting to you and being able to connect them to something that would be valuable in a consulting context. So it can be things about how you were a leader or working with a team or solving a disagreement. Very classic when you think of a behavioral interview. Some of those stereotypes, like, tell me about a time you disagreed with a colleague. You can think of it being a question kind of like that, but maybe a little bit more elevated and a little bit more in depth than you'd think of in a stereotypical behavioral fit interview. And then last, games, Pymetrics, case robots. These are a lot of fun. I genuinely enjoyed these. These are screeners, essentially. You will go through a game or a case robot of sorts before you do any sort of live interviewing. So this is typically one of the first filters. If, let's say, you've turned in your resume or a cover letter and they've decided that they do want to invite you to interview, the first kind of interview that you will do will be one of these screeners. And they're a mix of soft skills, a mix of problem solving, typically digital, and the format can vary. So at McKinsey, they have a pretty infamous one called Solve, and it is a computer game. BCG has a Pymetrics one. Other firms have case robots where you kind of walk through a case digitally in a chat with a chat bot. But they're fun. They're kind of, I don't know, because they're a different format, they just feel a little bit lower stakes. I'm sure they are obviously very important, but you can have fun with them. One little recommendation I want to flag to you quickly is there are some sites that will sell like access to really expensive simulations of these. I don't think it's worthwhile to spend your money on them. As long as you can, I don't know, play an average computer game and you're feeling pretty sharp with your problem solving skills, I would feel confident about addressing any sort of game or case robot. And I wanted to focus within interviews on the case interview, since this is where most people prep most heavily while they are in the recruiting process. And when you're looking at a case interview, there are 5 general components to an interview. First is structuring the problem. Second would be something like case math. And again, I just want to flag, these aren't necessarily in this order all the time. 2, 3, and 4 can vary in terms of what order they come in. So 3 is brainstorming, 4 is data analytics, and 5 would be a recommendation. And I'll walk through these really quickly. So number 1 is structuring the problem. Every case interview will start with a question, and then you are responsible for structuring your response into how you're thinking about that problem, how it breaks down into, often people call them buckets. That's like a very consulting firm, a consulting term for thinking about structuring. But it's just testing, can you break a problem that's very large and maybe a bit nebulous or vague? Can you break it down into smaller, mutually exclusive pieces that can be addressed independently of each other? So for example, an example scenario could be a shop is experiencing declining sales. How would you help them identify the cause and find a solution? This is probably a bit simple for what you would actually encounter in an interview, but the spirit of the question is, okay, like a shop is experiencing declining sales. Can I think of reasons that this would be an issue? And if I can find some of the underlying causes, can I drive to a solution? So for something like this, I might think, okay, if they're experiencing declining sales, there's multiple different factors that would feed into it. Let me think of 3 broader categorizations. And the 3 that come to mind right now would be, maybe there's some external factors that I would want to care about. Maybe there's some internal factors that I'd want to look at, and maybe I'd want to look at my customer. So once I've broken out those 3 buckets, then I can say, what are some sub factors within each of those that I would want to look at in order to get to a more specific root cause? So looking at external factors, for example, I could say, okay, let's look at market trends. Are there trends that are kind of governing why we're experiencing lower sales? Are there competitor behaviors or competitor offerings that we need to be aware of that are causing declining sales, so on and so forth? So that's structuring at a high level. Case math, the second piece. This is really evaluating if you can perform calculations quickly and accurately. So an example scenario here, again, pretty simplified, would be a gym has 2,000 active users who pay $30 a month for a pass. If the gym has $2,500 in costs each month, how profitable are they now? And how much would a $2 increase in their monthly gym pass affect probability? So if I'm looking at this, I do have to apply some structure in order to do this math quickly. First, I need to know, okay, if I'm asked about profitability, do I know how to calculate profit? And profit would be your revenue minus your costs, right? In order to do that, I also need to know how to calculate revenue and calculate cost. And those calculations are not difficult. I just need to know how they all nest together so I'm not messing up my numbers or dropping zeros, so on and so forth, and I can arrive at that answer quickly. And when you're doing case math, often the expectation is you can talk the interviewer through how you are doing the calculation. And that again is echoing that overall structuring that's very important when you are casing. Third is brainstorming. I think this might be my favorite, if not my second favorite. It's tied with structuring when it comes to case interviewing. I love brainstorming. This is just a fun, creative exercise. And typically they're just asking you to come up with as many creative ideas for whatever the question they're asking you is, like, very quickly. These can vary from, like, what are some reasons this might be happening, to what are some potential solutions that you would use to address this. Brainstorming is just super fun, and you can be very, very creative here. I think, would I say that there's such thing as a bad idea when you're brainstorming? Sure, for sure there is. But there are times where I was doing a case interview and I just felt like I was scraping the bottom of the barrel. And they were like, those were great. I think you could be even more creative. So I really feel like there is quite a breadth, not a breadth, pretty like wide range of answers and acceptable responses for something like brainstorming. So an example could be a fast food chain wants to increase their lunchtime sales. What ideas would you suggest? Again, you'd want to structure this, maybe put things in buckets. But if I was thinking about this, I would kind of just think, okay, maybe there's a couple things I could do. I could change the menu. What would some changes to the menu be? Okay, maybe I do lunch specials. So I have like exclusive items that are only available during lunch. Or maybe when I'm ready for lunch, like I reduce, maybe, and this tied to changing the menu, like maybe I'm reducing what is offered so I can streamline things. So it's not necessarily that like there's a special lunch salad, but maybe it's like, okay, you can only order burgers at lunch. You could order a burger anytime, but you can only order them during lunch specifically, and that can streamline sales a bit more. So those are some ways that you could do brainstorming. Fourth would be data analytics, and this is testing if you can draw insights and conclusions from data. The main skill that you need for data analytics is data literacy. You need to know how to read data, interpret data, and arrive at a reasonable conclusion that is sound and like scientific to some extent. Scientific meaning that it's like there's evidence and you're not going beyond what the evidence would suggest, right? So this can often be, they're going to show you a graph and you have to interpret the graph. It could be, here's a table with a bunch of data in it. Can you draw out any insights? So an example question could be, what insights could you draw from this graph illustrating monthly sales by category? And even though we don't have a graph here, I can think of some ways I would approach this. Okay, so if I'm looking at monthly sales by category, I'd probably want to see, is there a specific category that does super, super well consistently across months? Is there a specific category that maybe has peaks during certain months and like very big valleys during others? I might also look at months themselves. Are there really high months across categories? Are there really slow months across categories? And all of those things could inform you about what sales would look like across categories and could suggest a potential solution. And fifth, the recommendation. This is typically how you end a case interview. And this is asking, can you deliver a complete and succinct recommendation? So the example scenario that you'll often have when you're doing practice cases is the CEO of our client is joining our meeting in 3 minutes. Take these 3 minutes to prepare a final recommendation and deliver it. And recommendations, once you feel comfortable with casing, are actually very easy to deliver, because if you've been structured and thoughtful about how you're laying out everything, again, while you're, and maybe I didn't mention this, but while you're casing, you are writing everything down on paper. So you just take you take your paper, you take all your notes, and you can say, okay, at the beginning, I thought the problem came down to 1, 2, and 3 things. Then we looked at number 2 and broke 2 down, and 2 told us X, Y, and Z. We got this data that suggested this, which leads me to think that this solution might be the right one. So we should pursue this solution. I'm going to be opinionated about what I think we should do. Here are my reasons for picking that solution. And here are some considerations that we should keep in mind while we're implementing to mitigate any sort of risk. That's a recommendation. And again, if you've been structured, if your notes are clear, you can tie everything that you've been doing during the interview into one like super succinct, like think of it if it were written out, it would be a paragraph. And that's your recommendation. So some general tips for case interviews. Practice, practice, practice is the first one. You want to get to a point where casing is very comfortable, like you're not having to think super hard about conventions. You want parts of this to feel very second nature. And you also want it to feel a little bit fun. I know by the time I got to interviews, was it stressful? Of course. And like, was I nervous? 100%. But when it came to actually doing the case interview, I was not worried about my ability to break down a case. I just wanted to do well. And so I was able to have fun. I was able to feel creative when I did it, and it took some of the pressure off. And you get to that point by practicing a ton. One other tip I'd recommend is making a schedule for doing practice cases and stick to it. Set milestones for yourself. So for me, that typically looked like a timeline of sorts. I said, I want to feel like I am 70% case ready by this month. And the next month, I want to ramp up to 85. And the month after that, I want to feel like I am 100% ready to case. When I sent in my applications, I'd say I was about 85 to 90% case interview ready. If they had asked to interview me the next day, I think I would have been okay and done pretty well. But you still have time to continue preparing, but you want to feel pretty good about interviews. Once they decide to interview you, that process can move quickly. Number 2, do full case interviews and supplement with drills. What I'm trying to say here is there's only so much that a case interview can do. Doing full case interviews is absolutely helpful, but you need to keep track of where your weaknesses are and then try to drill those with additional practice problems. So one thing that can help you do this is keeping a tracker of errors. So just keep like a running list of here are types of errors that I'm making, here's when I'm making them, here's why I think I'm making them, can I understand why I'm making them? That gives you a really holistic sense of where you're struggling. And then you can design or find drills to target those weaker areas and help them become like very solid. So for me, like one thing I struggled with was just simply because a lot of business math was new to me. Some of those, I just found myself making really silly mental math mistakes. And so my husband, who's actually a big math guy, made me a bunch of drills. And so I would just do drills all the time. I'd do drills while I was on the bus and got very comfortable with case math very rapidly, specifically the mental math component of it. Number 3, my last advice here would be case solo and case with others. I would do a combination of self-study and group study for practice cases. And when you are doing a practice case, try to do a full one and then also get experience offering the case interview. I think you get powerful insights doing both. Obviously, you learn a lot by actually doing the case. But when you are delivering a case, you kind of get a sense for, okay, here's what they're really asking when they do this question. Maybe there are some keywords that you can pick up on that give you a sense for what kind of math you'd be doing. Or if they ask a specific question at the beginning, you can really cue in very quickly, oh, okay, this is probably a market sizing case, and I'm going to be doing this kind of stuff. And I think that will become more clear to you if you are also offering case interviews as well as doing them with others. And that kind of concludes the additional material before we go on to Q&A. But I wanted to quickly pause. I think we will announce the giveaway winner. All right, and it is Oria. Congrats. We will reach out to you and give you access to the bootcamp course. We're excited to have you. I actually am in charge of boot camps here at Leland, so I'm excited for this one. We have it built out. We have a really great crew that will be leading us through that. So congrats and thanks for being here. We will reach out to you. Awesome. And that kind of takes us through the end of my content here. We have a couple minutes to do some open Q&A. And I'll go ahead and stop screen sharing so I can see people's questions in the chat and we can address them. But before I do that, just wanted to quickly give a plug for some of Leland's additional resources for consulting. Leland Plus is our online content library. There you can find sample resumes and cover letters. You could get practice cases, solutions, recorded mock interviews. So that could be a really helpful resource just as you're trying to practice and solve for different areas of your interview process. Again, we have the consulting bootcamp coming up if you're interested in enrolling. And you can also sign up to receive individual one-on-one coaching. Again, if you sign this QR code, you will get access to my profile if you'd like to book an intro call or learn about what we can do in one-on-one coaching there as well. Thanks so much for being here. We can go ahead and open things up for Q&A. Excellent. Thanks for being here. Harshveer, I appreciate these questions. I don't know if I have personal experience with this, though I'm sure there are many neurodivergent folks at many firms. I know at McKinsey, we had a neurodivergent group, like a community across the firm. And I'm sure that is a very supportive community and great stuff happened there. I just don't have any personal experience being a part of that group. As far as showcasing skills via your LinkedIn or blog posts, I think highlight what's relevant. I talked about my biology stuff on my LinkedIn. That was a part of my background. It's a part of me that I love and I'm still passionate about. I really enjoy it. And I think being genuine in that regard shines through. It makes you personable. So I wouldn't shy away from what makes you special and what makes your background unique. Let's see. Andrew, you have your hand raised.
Thanks so much for doing this, Ellie. This was very, very helpful. One
So glad.
question that I had this morning, actually, I had a call with someone, kind of a networking call for
Mm,
someone who works at BCG. And I think it showed me I don't really know how to conduct those calls because
mm,
she said early on in the call that she's busy, and so it wasn't going to be like a half-hour friendly chat. But she still seemed willing to help. So out of that, I mean, I got a better understanding of what BCG was like, saw if there was anyone else that she knew in consulting and the area that I'm looking at in DC, and if she was willing to connect me to them. But it felt, I don't know, maybe too transactional because I just said, okay,
mm.
well, I know you're busy, so I'll cut to the chase. I don't know. How would you approach those initial networking calls when it doesn't seem like someone just wants to have a nice chat, but realizes, okay, I know you're coming to network. What can I
Yeah,
do? So,
yeah.
yeah, if
It's a great
any advice there
question.
would be great.
Yeah, I struggled with the same thing. I think those networking calls could feel very awkward because they feel transactional, like you mentioned. I'm not sure if they ever totally get to a point where they feel completely non-transactional. Um, but some tips that come to mind. I think first, try to make them very short, at least at the beginning. Like try to fit it in 15 minutes. And I think for that, I think folks will appreciate that you were trying to respect their time and say, like, hey, here's my plan for how these 50 minutes will go. That doesn't necessarily have to be like, here's what I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to walk you through everything I'm going to ask. But you can just say, hey, thanks so much for your time. I really want to learn more about this firm or the work that you do, a bit about me, would love to hear a little bit about you. And then I have some questions that I'd love to ask. And then at that point, you can spend a couple minutes on your intro. They'll probably spend a little bit longer on theirs since they have more experience in the area that you're interested in. That will give you helpful information on the firm, what they work on, if that's something that's interesting to you. And then from there, you can ask some of the questions that you have prepared. I think that's a great way for handling a lot of these initial chats. I think if you go beyond 15 minutes, it can feel very daunting and you're just kind of like, I don't know how to fill this time. And then it can feel a little bit more like if I were engaging in a network call, I might feel like, okay, do I need to provide them with stuff now? So overall, recommend keeping them short, come in with questions prepared. I think they will appreciate that you're structured. And then also, if it gets to the point where you're like, I don't have any more questions, this has been helpful, but I don't have any more content to drive, you can just say, hey, this was super helpful. You've given me a lot of questions and information that's helpful as I'm thinking through this, and I'm happy to give you some time back. And I'm sure they'll appreciate it, and then you don't have to like suffer through any more of an awkward networking call or feel any awkward silence. So that's kind of my main tip there. I hope that's helpful. Excellent. Let me just check my watch. I think we're at time, but if there's one more question, I'm happy to take one more before we log off. Alrighty. Well, thanks so much for being here, everyone. And I hope this was a helpful session, especially for folks who are thinking about making a transition to consulting. I think my main plug for you would be you can do it. It might feel intimidating. Do it intimidated. You can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And just really, I encourage you to find the things about interviewing and interviewing prep that you really enjoy. Lean into those things, have them be kind of your spike, let them be something that you're very good at. I think that will shine through. And then, of course, be proud of the background that you have. Don't let that feel like it inhibits you. There's so much that you'll learn. I certainly learned so much during the interviewing process and continue to learn once I was in consulting as well. So just have the confidence that you are capable and you can do it. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.